providers, how the role that each one plays, but also how they can work together to help grow the microfinance community, but also, as we heard in this morning's session, how they can work together to deal with challenges and issues faced in providing financial services to those at the bottom end of the market. So can everyone hear me okay? All right. And if you're in the back, I encourage you to come on up so we can see you and you can be a part of this. And if you're in front of the TV camera, you might actually get on the live stream here. So we have some distinguished guests with us here, people who know a lot about this topic. To my left is Alok Prasad, who is the CEO of the Microfinance Network in India. And he comes from a rich experience in commercial banking. He worked as a senior executive of private commercial banks before joining as the CEO of the Microfinance Network of India. MFIN has 42 non-bank financial company microfinance institutions in India as its members, and it's played a big role in influencing the central bank in finalizing the policies for microfinance institutions in India. Next to Alok is Javier Vaca. Javier works for the Ecuadorian network of microfinance organizations, and his work, he's done an excellent job in bringing the sector together to engage with government and to also generate financial information and performance information to inform government, but also so that his members can learn from each other. And some of you may be interested, if you work for a network here, Javier runs a very excellent training program. You may talk about that, I don't know, in your presentation. But he actually makes money on his training program and helps cover some of his expenses that way. So Javier is an innovator and a leading thinker in microfinance. He serves on the Smart Campaign Board and numerous other international groups, including TrueLift, in supporting microfinance worldwide. So thank you, Javier. Next to Javier is Abdul Karim, who is the Managing Director of PKSF in Bangladesh. We heard from you the first day, Mari Abdul Karim, and we're glad to have you with us. He's worked as a senior bureaucrat in the government of Bangladesh before joining PKSF. PKSF is the organization created by the government to support and fund microfinance in Bangladesh. Before joining PKSF, he was the Principal Secretary of the Prime Minister's Office. He also served as the Principal Secretary of several ministries of the government, including Commerce, Home, Fisheries and Livestock, and others. PKSF is a wholesaler in Bangladesh, started by the government more than 2 decades back with funding from the World Bank. It has supported more than 200 microfinance institutions and their partners in the country. So we're going to start to have a discussion. We'll hear from each of our panelists about the work that they do, and then that will lead us into a discussion about the role of government and networks in helping build a sector and creating bridges between government and microfinance institutions. So we will start with Alok Prasad. Let's hear more about the role of MFIN in India.
Thank you, Larry, and once again, many thanks for hosting us for this program. Certainly, I do believe that both regulation and self-regulation have a role to play, and there is a certain dynamic between the two to make things happen. I guess at the very start, I do want to make the point that in a world where even central banks at times feel challenged for regulating the financial institutions, self-regulation, I think, is a very special challenge, and it's almost a philosophical question. Can they do it? Is self-regulation a bit of an oxymoron? And therefore, certainly find ourselves in a very interesting situation, because this is a point in time where, for the first time ever, the Reserve Bank, India Central Bank, had recognized any industry association as SRO for the industry.
So let me get this clear. Your network has been recognized by the government to do self-regulation with your members or with any MFI in the country?
The way it works is that our members are all central bank regulated institutions, the NBFC MFIs. And just a small correction, the NBFC MFIs, today the membership is 49, which represents about 95% of the total industry.
Okay.
So pretty much everybody is covered by the industry. And the central bank can, under statute, only regulate the NBFCs and no other class of institutions. So therefore, the NGO world is outside the ambit of central bank regulation because the law doesn't allow that.
Okay.
So the self-regulation
for
also
those
is for
from
us.
outside India, can you NBFC?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely, oh yeah, oh sure. In India, you have the banks like every other country, and apart from the banks, you also have what are called the non-bank finance companies, the NBFCs. The NBFCs can be doing all kinds of financial intermediation, and the central bank has also created a specialized category called NBFC MFIs, which is non-bank finance companies, microfinance institutions. So this is like a subset of the larger universe of NBFCs, and within that category, there is now a specialized framework of regulation. So what you have in effect from the central bank is a set of specialized regulations which is governing the microfinance industry. And to Larry's point, there is also a small set of, not by way of numbers, much larger numbers of institutions, but in terms of client coverage, in terms of the loan book, you have the non-regulated NGO MFIs, and this set of institutions is currently not under any kind of regulation in India. So that's broadly the way it pans out in the division. So the central bank has actually given us the recognition for acting as a self-regulatory body for the NBFC MFIs, because under law that is all they can do. But it does cover 95% of the industry. So to that extent, it does translate into anybody, and in terms of materiality, it covers the entire universe. So moving on from there, I guess the core issue is that from a public policy standpoint, what does it do? And therefore, to what extent the regulator has a certain kind of expectation from the SRO. And I would sort of a little bit talk about the journey of the SRO which we've gone through. Because when we were set up in 2009, among the things which we said we would be acting for the industry was to act as an SRO. We did not have any formal recognition, but nonetheless, like the rules of a club, we said we will also be SRO. And I think fairly quickly in the early days, we took certain fairly bold steps in that direction, starting with a fairly stringent industry code of conduct. It had actually some very tight elements. For example, to control multiple lending, we did say at that point in time that not more than 3 lenders for a single client. There was no statute, no rule, no regulation saying that. We also, in fact, again pretty early, did a handshake with Microfinance Transparency, Chuck. That happened in March, April 2010, literally within 6-7 months of the industry association being formed. And we supported Chuck's initiative in India, including with money, for transparency in pricing.
Good.
3, again, very early days, right there around April, May, June of 2010, we began supporting the development of a credit bureau ecosystem for the industry. And I mean, that, believe me, was a lot of work and a lot of investment, in fact. So we partnered with a new credit bureau, which was specialized in being able to deal with microfinance clients. The industry put money into that activity as an investment in that company, for that matter. And I feel very proud of the fact that today, as we speak, there is something like 160 million client records with the Bureau. And these client records are updated on a weekly cycle. And every single loan, practically, is now made only by checking with the Bureau. So therefore, from early times, we did take some bold initiatives. I think it's been a good journey, went well. And the fact of the central bank's recognition, which we got in June this year, is, I think, in many ways merely a recognition of the fact of the way we made the journey quite well. And it's work in progress. I cannot for a moment claim that it's happening and we're at a stage where things are looking quite normal. They're not.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. But again, stepping back a minute, the crisis hit us notwithstanding all that we were starting to do in 2010. And post the crisis, the Reserve Bank stepped in, intervened very, very actively, apart from whatever else had a high-powered company.
And again, for those who aren't from the subcontinent, the crisis, can you give us a little bit of the scope and the size of
absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Larry. The fact is that in 2010, October, we had a crisis which was like an existentialist crisis for the industry. At that point in time, the industry was very much centered toward the south of the country. It had a very high exposure to one single state called Andhra Pradesh. And the local provincial government, for reasons we can keep debating forever, chose to come up with a new emergency law, in terms of which the operations of the microfinance companies in that state came to a grinding halt. You could not make a loan, you could not collect on a loan, almost. Now, with that reality, what you did end up having was something like about $1.6 billion of portfolio stuck in that province. You can't collect on that. The ramifications, the ripple effect, the collateral damage of all that was all through the country. The banks began to stop funding. The equity investors walked out. And therefore, in 2011-12, actually the industry balance sheet on an aggregate basis actually deleveraged. And the industry contracted. And yes, literally, I still recall that. This was, I think, Harris had come over to India in 2011, and at an annual conference he said, oh, the industry has just gone through a near-death experience. It was truly a near-death experience for the Indian industry. The good news is that the central bank on the one side, the federal government on the other side, they both were very supportive. The broad policy stance towards the industry was positive. It came under a lot of focus in terms of a regulatory focus. And as a consequence, we began to see a pushback taking place. And certainly by about 2012, you began to see some light at the end of the tunnel. And growth slowly began to come back. Funding began to come back. Investors began to come back. And in 2013, 2014's last financial year, the industry outside that single province grew at a rate of 51%. So actually an extremely strong bounce back which has taken place. But the bounce back is really a function of all the good folks coming together. And certainly counting ourselves in the category of the good folks. And yes, the fact is that post the crisis, post the fact of the central bank regulatory attention on the industry, post the fact that the federal government equally, in fact, said we must have a new legislation to regulate this industry at a national level. So a whole bunch of very positive developments on the one side, on the external ecosystem. Internally, I think two kinds of developments. On the one side, as the industry association, as the SRO, like a club, we didn't have formal recognition, a tightening of a lot of things on the ground, a lot of attention paid vis-a-vis the membership with regard to the implementation of the industry code of conduct, a kind of very stringent monitoring of the industry code of conduct on the ground, coupled with the Bureau. And on the Bureau particularly, I think we took a lot of steps in terms of ensuring that every single member starts by becoming a member of the Bureau, starts giving data on a certain cycle, which we finally compressed down to a weekly cycle, and then begins to use the Bureau report for every single lending decision. Now this on the one side, the central bank on the other coming out with fairly stringent regulations, which again we were expected to monitor, broadly speaking, building of a certain kind of confidence between the regulator on the one side, the industry represented by the industry association on the other side. And the recognition we see today, even though it began as a process with a recommendation being made by a very high-powered committee of the central bank way back in 2011. But a committee recommendation is good. It is not rule or regulation or law. The Reserve Bank actually took all of 3 years to translate that into issuing a notification. And yes, the happy news is that the notification actually was not about recognizing us as the SRO. It was about saying, industry association who would like to become an SRO, make an application to the central bank, we will examine and we'll decide. Application made, and literally within 3 months' time, approval given to us. So I go back to the core point I'm making, that this has been really a case of working very closely with the regulators, with the federal government, and being able to convince them that the industry can do it. And on their part, I think in many ways it has been like a leap of faith. It's been a leap of faith in the industry, a leap of faith in the ability of the industry body to take it forward. Having said that, the reality is what? The reality is that it's a work in progress, because regulating or self-regulating in this context an industry which is as large as it is in India, we're talking in terms of currently as we speak 49 members, a loan book of over $6.5 billion US, over 30 million clients, a branch network across the country of about 11,000 branches. So we're looking at an extremely large, extremely dispersed industry across the country, and it's the large country we have, growing very rapidly, and with all that, very stringent regulations that the central bank has put down, a stringent fair practices code of the central bank, and then of course on top of all that, the industry code of conduct. So a whole bunch of things out there, and as I said, work in progress, but I am certainly cautiously optimistic.
Good, very good. So it seems your association, your network, has played a key role in bringing the members together, especially the largest ones, and responding to government, responding to the crisis, but actually participating in developing systems, procedures, things that give the central bank confidence that there is a way, a group that is looking at this, so much so that they gave you authorization to be a self-regulatory organization. Now, in the panel before, we heard Chuck say self-regulation doesn't work. So, and you've been in charge with self-regulation. So, what do you see the role of self-regulation is, and is it sufficient, or does it combine with other things to give a proper environment?
Look, quite frankly, the way I would see this is, and by the way, I have actually been a regulator for the larger part of my life.
Okay.
So I do combine both ends of the world,
right,
and I've seen both ends of the world. And I would really say that in a bottom line sense, we don't have the final answer because it is a very difficult dynamic we are dealing with. Let us accept, and I say this plainly and honestly, that the profit driver generates its own kind of impulse. And as a consequence, it's really so much about an interplay of forces on both sides. Now, I call self-regulation on the part of the industry as enlightened self-interest. So therefore, you see it in a forward-looking sense and say that, look, in the long term, this will serve me better than to certainly have the heavy hand of a formal statutory regulator on me. So therefore, if we can collectively do this for ourselves, in the long term, we are winners. Now, that's a message which has to be constantly repeated. Some buy it less. Some say, hey, hang on, I don't know what this is about. So same story, it's a process. And I don't think we have come to a stage where one can say with any confidence that this is going to be resulting in a certain given outcome.
But let's go to the point that Chuck made, that you sometimes have to make difficult choices as a self-regulator. You're regulating your members, and some of them may be out of line, but their dues are paying your salary. So how do you deal with that in an honest and direct way?
Allow me a little story on this.
Okay.
2010, I joined as the first CEO of MFIN, and I have a son who's also a budding banker. He's in Singapore. He gives me a call and says, hey, Dad, what are you up to now? I said, you know, this is the organization, and among the things we shall be doing is self-regulation. So he said, hey, hang on. Aren't the same folks paying your salary? I said, right. Yes, of course they are. So, but tell me, Dad, isn't that a case of literally biting the hand that feeds you?
Right.
So yes, you're right. However, what is happening is that, at a systemic level, we are seeing a certain change given the fact of the way the Reserve Bank has come out with the framework of self-regulation. Among the things the central bank has said while giving us the recognition and authorization is that over time you shall be reducing your support on members. So therefore, member funding will be only one part of your funding, and you will also be getting funding from the larger set of stakeholders. B, while we will have, which is what we have right now, certain set of members which are the NBFC MFIs only with the 49, which is the core.
Right.
But now we are expanding beyond the core and saying that we will also have a new category of members called associate members. Under the in that category, you can actually have a very, very wide spectrum of players, stakeholders who are relevant to the industry. It can be the banks, it can be the bureaus, it can be the rating agencies, it can be the research bodies, it can be the insurance companies, it can be the telecom companies in the payments space, and so on. So in effect, the ecosystem is being widened to cover anybody and everybody who believes that they are a stakeholder in the industry. And with that kind of widening of the ecosystem for ourselves, it also means that our ability to be able to, derive a broader kind of support for our initiatives of self-regulation is so much greater. Coupled with that is the fact that our dependence on member funding goes down. Now, I think these are the two legs we need to be standing on as we look ahead. And with that happening, same story. It's a process. It's not an event. We are, I think, walking that road, that path quite well. And I'm hopeful that if we are able to carry on in that fashion as we are right now, early days, of course, things should work out.
All right, good. Let's go to Karim. You work for an institution formed by the government to help expand microfinance in Bangladesh. So let's hear a little bit more about how PKSF works and what you see as this role of government and role of networks in supporting the microfinance community.
Thank you, Larry. In fact, Bangladesh is unfortunately resource-constrained country, but our constitution makes it obligatory for the government to ensure prosperity, welfare of the government, welfare of the people, and poverty reduction is a means to achieve that goal. In fact, the successive governments in Bangladesh, being the constitutional obligation, have taken very impressive steps, including legal regulations, legal rules, to establish institutions that will contribute towards poverty alleviation. In fact, all the governments have done this, and you know that the result is impressive. Bangladesh is the birthplace of three concepts in microcredit. The retail microcredit introduced by Professor Mohammad Yunus, the wholesale microcredit introduced by PKSF, meaning that we extend fund to the borrowers through the NGOs, we call them partner organizations. And the third is establishment of a regulator in the sector. We call it Microcredit Regulatory Authority of Bangladesh. And these all have been set up by government, done by the government. And through recent activities, through our MFIs, these microcredit activities have been diversified to address multifarious dimensions of poverty. And PKSF is an organization which has diversified this to address problems like health, education, sanitation, nutrition, etc. And government has played a very important role in this aspect, and government is the facilitator or catalyst, and the MFIs, the NGOs, are the drivers of creating all these activities. In fact, during the last 10 years, our poverty has reduced from 42% to 25%. Normal poverty, not extreme poverty. But I have prepared a number of slides to show that I have worked very hard, but our time will not permit. So I'll go only through the important slides. It doesn't work. It is working. So United Nations has recognized Bangladesh as the pioneer of microfinance in 2005. It has gone back.
That one?
Next. Next. Yeah. Okay. In fact, you can operate, okay, and I will tell you. Next one, please. So this Grameen Bank, the initiative was taken by Professor Mohammad Yunus, and it started as a project, but there was a legislation, parliamentary legislation in 1983, and Grameen Bank came into existence. Next one, please. So this is the story of Grameen Bank, the most successful project in the whole world, perhaps, for microcredit and poverty alleviation. Next one, please. So the NGO Affairs Bureau and the Department of Social Welfare, they recognized, they registered these MFIs initially. And next one, please. So initially, NGOs or MFIs did not have sufficient fund for their activities. So government established PKSF. It is the apex organization for providing financial supports and capacity building services. It was also at the advice of Professor Muhammad Yunus, mainly Professor Muhammad Yunus and a few other people. Next one, please. We have more than 200 partner organizations. Next. And we have serious standards, very severe standards, and formulated policies for funding the MFIs. Next one, please. And at the moment, we have 8.28 million borrowers with an outstanding loan of Bangladesh taka 104,000 million, equivalent to about 1.3 billion US dollar. And our market share, PKSF's market share in the microcredit industry is about 31%, and institutional development is our aim. Next one, please. And in 2006, the Institute of Microfinance was established by the government. The aim was to provide capacity building, training, and research for the MFIs. And Institute of Microfinance is now conducting research and on various aspects of microfinance, how to bring about improvement in the sector, how to make microcredit more effective, cost-effective, etc. How to make it sustainable. INM has now started doing diploma courses, and ultimately they will issue master's courses in microfinance. So before establishment of this microcredit regulatory authority, there was, I must admit, less discipline in the sector, and some of the NGOs used to claim higher interest rates, and it is the government of Bangladesh who is established this microcredit regulatory authority in 2006 under an act of the parliament. And with the establishment of MRA, I think there has been significant discipline in the sector. Before that, some of the NGOs even were called money lenders by the people, and there was no dignity and honor for the sector people, but MRA has brought discipline in the sector, and they fixed the interest rate at 27%. And Palli Karma-Sahayak Foundation, PKSF, has even reduced it by another 2%. Our ceiling is 25%. And there are rules for transparent operation of the microcredit sector. In fact, loan loss policy, service charge calculation policy, and interest on savings policy, these are all decided by the Microcredit Regulatory Authority rules and regulations. Next, please. The MFIs reduced their service charge on microcredit loans and started calculating service charges on declining balance method instead of flat rate. Previously, it was flat rate, and some of our MFIs, partner organizations, they have reduced interest rate even further, between 21 to 23, 24. The ceiling is, our ceiling is 25. And the microfinance has been started, services has been started even by some banks, government banks and privatized banks, 10 of them, and the portfolio is about 310,000 million taka, equivalent to about 4 billion US dollars, including rural finance. The central bank has a big program of rural finance, and they channelize this fund through the MFIs, partner organizations. even the government, some of the ministries and some of the specialized departments of the government have microfinance programs which contribute about 5% of the sector. Next one, please. We have a number of networking organizations, mainly the Credit and Development Forum. Mr. Awal is here, very active among our MFIs. And its activities include building the capacity of MFIs, lobbying for them, networking and advocating for the microcredit-related issues, conducting research, and we have got the international network of alternative financial institutions, INAFI, for social inclusion, financial inclusion, climate change. Palli Karma-Sahayak Foundation, among other things, is now implementing projects through our partner organizations for climate adaptation and mitigation in climate vulnerable areas. So INAFI also conducts research, develops capacity of member MFIs, organizes workshops, etc. Government has very big social safety net programs, and they are allowing old age allowances for the widows, even with limited capacity of the government. Scholarship or funding for the single parent women, the vulnerable group feeding program, and special allowance financial support for the freedom fighters, cash for work program, disaster coping arrangement, etc. In fact, next one, please. I would conclude by saying that I would be subjected to questions and answers, any question from the audience, but I would like to conclude by saying that the Bangladesh microfinance industry is a huge market, and 40 million borrowers with an outstanding portfolio of Bangladesh taka 900 billion US, equivalent to US dollar about 12 billion. It is running, we will say that in a transparent manner, and the government is extending all support to this sector, including PKSF and MRA, and the Bangladesh Bank is also extending support to the MFIs so far as their agricultural loan is concerned. So government is there as a facilitator and catalyst. The MFIs are there, our partner organizations are there in the driving seat to work for poverty alleviation, and it's working well.
Very good.
Thank you.
It's fascinating to see in such a well-developed microfinance market the level of government support in creating different types of institutions. So you have a wholesaler, but then you also have a regulatory authority, a trainer,
And a retailer,
Yeah.
retail micro
Right.
producer.
and then this Institute for Research and Training. So there's a variety of needs that take place there, and the government's way of acting has been to set up separate institutions for these activities.
Yeah, government has tried very hard to establish these institutions, and there is good coordination also. And PKSF itself is working very hard to diversify its microcredit programs. For example, we are limited to microcredit loans only previously. Now we are going for household basis, people-centric, multidimensional poverty alleviation programs where microcredit is an important component, but there are programs for health, primary health care, education, sanitation, and fund for emergency, meeting emergency by the poor people in the cyclone-prone areas, in the disaster-prone areas. And Bangladesh is most climate vulnerable country in the world, though our emission is lowest in the world. So we are addressing the disaster, these climate vulnerable areas also through implementation of various programs. For example, very simple, in cyclone-prone areas, coastal areas, we are constructing houses or assisting people to construct houses with plinth area above the flood level and the tube wells above the flood level and the latrines above the flood level. And in salinity-prone areas, we are helping people by giving seed, etc., which are salinity-prone, so that crops can grow there. And in flood-prone areas also, there are some area which keeps under water for a major portion of the year with saline water. We have introduced what is called some sort of basta culture, gunny bags filled with soil and some fertilizer, put it on some pole, etc., and putting seeds there. So, and various type of income generating activities all through our partner organizations.
Very good.
And training facilities, income generating training facilities for the younger people, boys and girls, and scholarship program, stipend program for the children of the borrower families. So it is a holistic, household basic, people-centric development program supported by government. One small correction, PKSF is a homegrown organization on the idea of Professor Mohammad Yunus and others. It's not a World Bank funded organization.
Oh, right. Okay,
it
sorry.
It is a Bangladesh
Right.
government founded, but it is a not-for-profit organization. So we have the benefit of both sides. It is an autonomous body. The governing body is, and the general body is competent to take all major decisions. But it's not required to follow strict government rules about project implementation and program implementation.
Very good. So Javier, let me hear from you about Ecuador and how RFR operates, how you coordinate with government, how you build the sector through your work there. Do you want to?
I will speak in Spanish, so please, people who don't speak Spanish, put your headphones. Thank you. Gracias, Larry, por esta oportunidad. Voy a compartirles un poco desde la visión de nuestra red, que trabaja en comparación de los anteriores panelistas de la India y Bangladesh. Pues Ecuador es un país pequeño en población, pero muy diverso en lo que es microfinanzas. Okay. Un primer punto es acerca del rol de las redes, justamente como Larry mencionaba. En cuanto a la representación e incidencia, yo creo que es la primera razón para constituir una red, sobre todo en nuestro caso es lograr un entorno favorable a las microfinanzas. Un segundo punto es las alianzas para lograr economías de escala, es decir, acceso a mayores servicios a menor costo, porque es un grupo de instituciones las que se benefician. Y por último, los servicios de fortalecimiento para los miembros, ¿no?, que buscan mejorar las condiciones de competitividad de las instituciones de microfinanzas y básicamente los catalogamos en capacitación, asistencia técnica, innovación y desarrollo de productos, desde una perspectiva, en nuestro caso, que deben ser sostenibles en el tiempo, o sea, no deben depender de un proyecto o de subsidios externos. Sí pueden apoyar un proyecto para desarrollar los servicios, pero ya para mantenerlos en el tiempo tienen que ser una necesidad que demanda el mercado. Voy a concentrarme un poco más en la incidencia en regulación con el gobierno, porque desde nuestro punto de vista los gobiernos van cambiando, cambian tendencias, cambian presidentes, incluso dentro del mismo periodo de algún presidente cambian funcionarios y cada funcionario muchas veces tiene su propia idea de lo que debe ser las finanzas o las microfinanzas, Entonces hay que hacer un proceso también, desde nuestro punto de vista, llamamos una educación microfinanciera, ¿sí? Y es algo que se hace y se vuelve a hacer conforme cambian las personas. Nos basamos en 2 puntos básicos para esto. Uno es explicar las mejores prácticas de microfinanzas. Muchas veces nos basamos en otros países, porque los políticos a veces dicen, no, lo de nuestro país hay que cambiarlo. Entonces decimos, no, pero las mejores prácticas de instituciones internacionales dicen que esta es la tendencia. No podemos mencionar ahí a SIGAB, al propio Microcredit Summit, a otras iniciativas sociales que muestran ya cuál es la tendencia. Y lo otro es partir de la experiencia de los miembros de la red. En el caso de nuestra red tenemos diferentes tipos de miembros. Tenemos desde ONGs, que cada vez son menos en Ecuador, desde el punto de vista que muchas están optando convertirse en instituciones reguladas. Tenemos bancos privados, algunos que han hecho downscaling, otros que provienen de las ONGs, son bancas más especializadas, y tenemos cerca de 950 cooperativas de ahorro y crédito, que ahora el gobierno ha decidido regularlas, y es otro tipo de incidencia ahí, porque hay desde unas muy grandes hasta unas que son muy pequeñas, ¿no es cierto? Entonces buscamos un entorno favorable, atender a las necesidades de las instituciones de microfinanzas a todas, fortalecer al sector obviamente, y una normatividad que se adecue a la necesidad de las instituciones. Dentro de eso se debe reconocer la especialización de las instituciones de microfinanzas, resaltar sobre todo el componente social, porque mucho hablamos y conforme lo hablamos también de algunos paneles, y el panel anterior me gustó mucho, y Chuck mencionaba y me decía, Ecuador es un país que ha hecho bien las cosas, y me decía, me gusta cómo han trabajado, y les voy a poner unos ejemplos que pueden dar la pauta de cómo se puede hacer un proceso conjunto entre gobierno y las instituciones de microfinanza. Entonces, cuando hablamos de microfinanzas, es mejor hablar del número de personas beneficiadas, ¿sí? Porque en montos, cuando nos comparan con el resto del sector financiero, pues dicen, no, pues apenas las microfinanzas representan, qué sé yo, el 10% del total de activos o de total de cartera, pero en cambio cuando decimos, bueno, pues son tantos millones de clientes y representan, en el caso de Ecuador, los microempresarios representan el 51% de la población económicamente activa, entonces el gobierno dice, esos son número de votos, ¿no es cierto? Entonces ya cambian las cosas, porque dice, allá hay gente, y allá hay gente que debe estar feliz con el gobierno para que nos relija. Entonces son mensajes que vamos llegando a la conclusión. ¿Por qué nos diferenciamos de la banca múltiple, o sea, de los grandes bancos? ¿Por qué es diferente las microfinanzas? Que hay muchos políticos que nos dicen, pero ¿cómo es posible que ustedes digan que al más pobre hay que cobrarle más? Debe ser lo contrario. Entonces, cuando uno le empieza a explicar las microfinanzas, la estructura, por qué la banca múltiple y los grandes créditos sí pueden ser a menores tasas, dicen, sí, no, tiene lógica, tiene razón, no es algo sin base. La diversidad de las instituciones y la estrategia de inserción en la política pública de las microfinanzas. La importancia para nosotros de la red, lo que debe resaltar es el número de miembros. En nuestro caso son 46 instituciones que representan aproximadamente el 70% del mercado de microfinanzas en Ecuador, es decir, representamos a la mayoría. El número de clientes atendidos, ¿cuál es el porcentaje en cambio que está desatendido? Porque al gobierno también lo que le decimos es, este porcentaje está atendido, pero mire que todavía falta más. Entonces las políticas que usted tome debería ser cómo incluir a los que todavía no están incluidos. Y sobre todo que es un mecanismo eficaz para combatir la pobreza de una manera sostenida. Que muchos programas de gobierno invierten recursos, dan bonos a los pobres, les dan infraestructura, pero se acaba el dinero, se acaba el proyecto y poco a poco el pobre va descendiendo nuevamente a su condición de pobreza porque se gasta lo que le dio el gobierno. En cambio, las microfinanzas incentivan créditos revolventes, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, comprender estos procesos de incidencia nos ha tomado algún tiempo. La incidencia es una planificación, aquí está un ciclo, no voy a hablar mucho de eso, hay literatura que habla de cómo puede una red o un grupo hacer incidencia al gobierno, porque al principio íbamos, nos reuníamos mucho, pero no éramos muy efectivos. Entonces, al final también los miembros de la red decían, es que yo quiero esto, es que debemos lograr como red, qué sé yo, que las tasas de interés no bajen o que el gobierno ponga recursos o cuánta cosa, ¿no? Entonces, el tema era cómo hacerlo, cómo aprender. Entonces, hay un proceso, hay que identificar a los actores, hay dimensiones dentro de la incidencia política, cómo la sociedad civil debe desarrollar capacidades y poder de influencia, cómo las políticas y prácticas también inciden en esto, el rol de los pobres, sobre todo en las microfinanzas hay beneficiarios finales, entonces hay que poner, bueno, ¿cuáles son sus necesidades? Si el beneficiario final le dice al gobierno, sí, yo quiero microcrédito, el gobierno les escucha a ellos. A las instituciones no tanto, porque empieza a cuestionar, bueno, cuánto es tu ganancia y por qué tú eres un banco, por qué tú eres una cooperativa, por qué tú eres una ONG. En Ecuador al momento, por ejemplo, decir banco es como decir una mala palabra, porque desde el presidente y los políticos dicen los bancos han sido malos, han sacado dinero de la gente, han quebrado algunos bancos y no han devuelto sus depósitos, entonces hay toda una coyuntura en contra, por ejemplo, de los bancos. Y los espacios democráticos, ¿no? de defender, sobre todo en gobiernos democráticos como el nuestro, pues hay que exigir los espacios. Este es un análisis con algunas herramientas de un análisis de fuerzas, ¿no? Que es con quién tengo que ir a hablar, quiénes tienen incidencia, quiénes tienen buena imagen ante el gobierno. Entonces hacemos un balance entre la importancia de las instituciones y su grado de influencia. Entonces, para el mensaje que queremos conseguir, ¿cuál es la importancia de acudir a estas instituciones y cuál es su nivel de influencia? Y después priorizamos, y en el cuadro que se muestra ahí hay el cuadro, ¿no? el gráfico, que nos habla que las que tienen mayor importancia y mayor influencia, pues en el caso de Ecuador son las cooperativas de ahorro y crédito porque dan un mensaje más social, pero son instituciones financieras que hacen microcrédito. Decíamos, ya no hablemos de los bancos ni de las ONGs, porque las ONGs en Ecuador también están siendo cuestionadas. Entonces vamos por el lado de las cooperativas, pero lleguemos con el mismo mensaje. ¿A dónde vamos a llegar? A las superintendencias que regulan, que son encargadas de normativa, y al Ejecutivo, porque en el caso de Ecuador, el Ejecutivo actualmente tiene mayoría en la Asamblea y mayoría en casi todos los poderes del Estado. Entonces, quien decide si va o no una política. El resto de actores pueden ser importantes, pero para la incidencia en Ecuador, al momento no son tan importantes. Entonces hay que priorizar también con quién hablar. Después, dentro de un enfoque que en literatura lo llaman rápido, hay que ver las tres fuerzas, ¿no? Los vínculos que uno puede tener, necesariamente hay que hacer vínculos con personas, porque las personas son las que toman las decisiones. Sí, pueden hablar mucho de partidos políticos, de ideologías, pero al final tú debes convencer a una persona que tiene el poder de decidir. Hay un contexto político al que te puedes alinear o te puedes oponer según veas por dónde eres más efectivo, y sobre todo nosotros sí tenemos control del último, de la evidencia. Entonces, en la evidencia es lo que decía un poco Larry, que si ustedes manejan información trimestral, sí. Una de nuestras fortalezas es manejar la información de nuestras instituciones. Entonces vamos con evidencia, presentamos, ¿no es cierto? Mire, esta es nuestra evidencia, esta es nuestra información, aquí es donde estamos, y sobre todo la evidencia de la pobreza en Ecuador. Mire, estas familias son pobres, no han tenido acceso, muchas veces están trabajando con agiotistas que en condiciones de explotación. Después hay que definir un solo mensaje, perdón, ya se adelantó. Hay que definir un solo mensaje. En nuestro caso, ¿cuál era el mensaje? Primero, ¿cuál es el porcentaje de acceso a financiamiento? Después, ¿cuál es el costo de brindar servicios financieros? Entonces, en Ecuador era mejor no hablar de tasas de interés, porque hablábamos de tasas de interés y el tema era muy sensible. O sea, el gobierno ya decía, no, las tasas es muy sensible. Bueno, entonces no hablemos de tasas, hablemos de cuánto le cuesta en una institución colocar crédito y por qué. Y con el gobierno decíamos, de estos costos, ¿cuáles podemos bajar y cuáles no? ¿Cuáles el gobierno puede ayudar para que las instituciones bajen, no? El tema de pobreza, del resultado del impacto de las microfinanzas, sí, y de la viabilidad de las microfinanzas en el país. Entonces, finalmente hay que priorizar qué objetivos podemos obtener, qué es factible y qué no es factible. O sea, en Ecuador, por ejemplo, decían, no, es que deben dejar libres las tasas. Entonces decíamos, no, en la coyuntura que estábamos viviendo, cuando el Estado hizo un estudio de tasas de interés de todo el sector financiero, se daba cuenta que había instituciones de consumo, por ejemplo, que cobraban el 120% de tasa efectiva anual, mientras otras en la misma línea de consumo cobraban el 30%. O sea, ¿por qué una cobra tanto y otra cobra relativamente tan diferente, ¿no? Entonces, cuando hacía un mapeo de tasas, había mucha diversidad y decía, el mercado no funciona. Entonces, el gobierno dijo, vamos con una norma de tasas. Entonces, ya no podíamos oponernos, o sea, no había discurso que se logre oponer. Decíamos, sí, vamos con la norma de tasa, estamos de acuerdo que lo mejor para el cliente es que bajen las tasas, pero definamos mecanismos que ayuden a esto. Entonces, llegamos a un pacto con el gobierno de sentarnos a trabajar conjuntamente, ¿no? Entonces, llegamos a definir, ya, no es factible que se elimine la normativa, pero es factible darle al gobierno una solución para que la tasa no sea fijada de una manera no técnica. Entonces, llegamos, por ejemplo, adelantándome a los ejemplos que voy a poner, que la norma incluye una diferenciación por segmentos. Entonces, hay segmento para vivienda, segmento de consumo, segmento comercial y microcrédito. Y dentro de microcrédito hay subsegmentos, ¿sí? Entonces, en la ley nosotros logramos introducir que la tasa se fijará en base a los segmentos y subsegmentos que determine la autoridad. Eso nos abrió la puerta para hacer una incidencia posterior. Y definimos los subsegmentos y yo me reuní con una autoridad y me decía, ¿y cómo definimos los subsegmentos? Entonces yo le expliqué la teoría de las microempresas y los subsegmentos en Ecuador están definidos como subsegmento para la economía de subsistencia, para la economía simple y la economía ampliada, que son las divisiones de la microempresa. Entonces hay 3 subsegmentos. ¿Por qué? Porque el gobierno llega a calcular la tasa ponderada del mercado, ¿sí? Y a eso ellos le suman un plus y ese es el techo. Entonces, los créditos de menor monto, al ponderarlos, casi no tenían incidencia sobre el mercado. Cuando uno hace los subsegmentos, hace que los créditos más pequeñitos tengan el peso dentro de su propio subsegmento. Entonces, por ejemplo, eso nos dimos cuenta que era lo ideal y viene funcionando en Ecuador, ¿no? Entonces, en Ecuador, según el estudio que hizo Chuck, esto obligó a que las instituciones sean más eficientes, ¿sí? Y tuvieron que ser eficientes o desaparecían. Al final ninguna institución desapareció, los gerentes tomaron políticas, sí hubo desatención en alguno de los sectores, pero no desaparecieron las instituciones. Y algunas ahora son más eficientes y están obligando a que baje la tasa por eficiencia, ya no por normativa, ¿no? Entonces, el tema es cómo contar con respuestas técnicas. Entonces, en los ejemplos, ya para terminar, uno es este de los techos de tasas de interés, ¿no es cierto?, de los segmentos y subsegmentos. Otro es de la supervisión especializada. Nosotros decíamos, para cooperativas de ahorro y crédito está bien que el Estado las controle, pero con una supervisión especializada a este tipo de instituciones. Se creó una ley específica, se creó una superintendencia específica. Tiene problemas, está aprendiendo del sector, pero se logró que por lo menos hay una diferenciación. Sí, el tema de la regulación de cooperativas y ONGs. Las ONGs, al final el gobierno decía, ¿por qué las ONGs dan créditos si no son instituciones financieras, ¿no? Entonces esa lucha todavía tenemos. Por eso es que muchas ONGs están optando por convertirse más bien en instituciones reguladas, porque dice, el gobierno me va a regular igual que una regulada, entonces mejor me convierto y ya, porque ya no tengo beneficio, entre comillas, de ser ONG. Ahora hay nuevas normas que apuntan al tema del direccionamiento del crédito, ¿sí? Por tipo de crédito para producción, por ejemplo. Hay mucha carga impositiva nueva que está afectando a las instituciones y que queremos ver la manera cómo a las instituciones de microfinanzas se rebaje esta carga, porque eso también influye en la tasa de interés final. Y hay políticas para la inclusión financiera. Está desarrollando el Estado todo lo que es un sistema de pagos no solo interbancario, interinstitucionales, y el concepto de billetera electrónica lo va a desarrollar. Entonces también vemos que hay oportunidades de incidencia para trabajar de forma conjunta. Y eso es un resumen de lo que hemos hecho.
Thank you. It's fascinating to me. I mean, you had this situation where the government wants to put in an interest rate cap, and you as a network, I mean, part of your ongoing work is you've studied how to influence government and how to make sure that you the government can understand the needs of your members. And instead of fighting against the interest rate cap and saying, no, that's bad and it won't work here, you actually worked with the government so that they could set caps that were appropriate for different types of institutions. So you helped them develop sophistication in their regulations that actually understood different sizes of institution, different types, different client bases, and the rates that they would need to charge. How did you get your members to go along? Often members aren't, you know, they want to hold out for the extreme, or some are going to want higher rates for them. You would have competing interest among your members. So how did you get your members together to be able to give a common message to government?
Sí, fue bastante difícil porque uno como red no tiene que hacer incidencia solo con el gobierno, sino hay que hacer una incidencia interna con los miembros también. Nosotros tenemos, por nuestra estructura de diversidad, tenemos un consejo directivo donde están representantes de cada tipo de institución. Entonces, las instituciones eligen a sus representantes que están en nuestro directorio, y en el directorio se llega a una discusión de estos temas y en lo posible a acuerdos. Entonces, yo en mi directorio tengo representantes de bancos, de cooperativas y de ONGs. Y tenemos 2 directores independientes que no son de instituciones financieras, por temas de buen gobierno corporativo. Entonces, ellos también dan una opinión de lo que pasa del mercado sin ser parte de. Eso ayuda mucho, porque son ellos precisamente lo que nos dicen. Si tú vas y pides al gobierno que no ponga una ley de tasas de interés, te van a decir que eres un opositor y te van a cerrar la puerta y van a hacer cualquier cosa. O sea, van a poner, había diputados, asambleístas que decían, es que Ecuador es un país dolarizado porque tenemos el dólar como moneda, no tenemos moneda propia. Tenemos que tener las mismas tasas que Estados Unidos, y en Estados Unidos hay tasas de un solo dígito. Y había posiciones así muy absurdas, sin estudio técnico. Entonces, al final decíamos, la ley tiene que ir, porque es una necesidad. También había una crítica muy grande a las instituciones que cobraban tasas altas. Entonces, íbamos donde el gobierno con el mensaje de decir, está bien, veamos una ley, estamos de acuerdo que hay una ley para techos de tasas de interés, pero fíjese que hay estas diferencias con microcrédito, fíjese en estas tablas de costos. Entonces, obviamente las instituciones que prestan menor monto son las que más alto costo relativo al número de créditos tiene. Obviamente había instituciones que iniciaban con créditos de $50. Cuando uno compara el costo de dar un crédito de $50 es altísimo, ¿sí? Y le decíamos, y esta misma institución da créditos de mayor monto y hace un subsidio cruzado, que muchas de ustedes conocen. O sea, al principio los créditos más pequeños no cubren ni siquiera los costos. Decíamos, si tú pones un techo, lo que va a pasar es que a las instituciones no van a poder dar estos créditos pequeñitos. Y gráficamente mostramos, si tú pones el techo aquí, va a haber esta afectación. Si tú pones el techo más abajo, estas son instituciones afectadas. Había instituciones cooperativas de ahorro y crédito muy eficientes porque tienen una metodología de participación de las personas que nunca les afectó la ley, porque tenían tasas más abajo de los techos que pusieron, pero habían otras que sí les afectaba. Entonces, en la red incluso estas instituciones que no les afectaba apoyaban de que no era bueno poner tasas de interés más abajo que les perjudiquen a otras instituciones, porque habría gente que se quedaría sin ser atendida. Al final el gobierno puso la primera tasa, que puso el primer techo alrededor de 42% efectivo anual, es decir, el gobierno anualiza todas las tasas para que sean comparables, y esto afectó a un grupo de instituciones, y el gobierno ahí bajó por 4 veces la tasa hasta llegar al 30%. Nosotros cada vez que el gobierno bajaba hacíamos un estudio de impacto, y cuando mostramos al gobierno cuál fue el efecto de bajar la tasa al 42 primero y después al 30 y los desplazados, el gobierno dijo, sí, está bien, ante la opinión pública yo ya cumplí en poner techos, ya he afectado, sé que ha habido afectaciones, pero vamos a dejarle ahí hasta nuevos estudios. Entonces, al momento son más de 6 años que el gobierno no ha vuelto a bajar la tasa. Obviamente con estudios demostraba, incluso técnicos del gobierno decían, sí, creo que se nos fue un poco la mano, pero ellos decían, pero políticamente no podemos volver a subir la tasa, ¿no? Entonces ustedes ajustes en esta regla y lleguemos a un pacto de que nosotros no topamos la tasa y ustedes hagan lo posible por bajar sus costos. Y hasta ahí estamos viviendo el día de hoy. No sabemos si a futuro querrá nuevamente disminuir o no, pero más bien está hablando de que quiere crear más subsegmentos y más segmentos, porque todo método es imperfecto. Siempre va a haber algunos perjudicados, entonces no hay método perfecto, pero sí hay métodos menos imperfectos que otros, y creo que ese rol sí tuvimos.
Thank you, Javier. I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. We have some very experienced network operators here. Do we have a microphone available for, we have a question up here in the front.
On my way.
Thanks.
Thank you, Larry, for giving me the chance to raise some questions. This is Munawar Reza Khan from TMSS, Bangladesh. It is one of the largest microfinance institutions in Bangladesh. My first question, I have three very quick questions to the representative of India from Alok, Prasad. That you have said, so far I could understand from your statements that NBFC, MFIs, and NGOs, there are three types of institutions are working throughout the India. But my question is here that how do you categorize these three entities regarding the enrollment point of view in your networking? My second question is to you that what are the strategies are being taken by your networking in terms of bridging between the interest of MFIs and the regulatory framework of India? And number three, what type of role you usually play with the regulatory body in India regarding initiating of new rules and regulations and enactment of laws for microfinance industry? Number four is, this is the last to you, that
you got a good memory.
does your networking work on capacity building of MFIs and creating connectivity of funding opportunities from the external sectors like banks, different institutions? And last of all, so far I could also understand to the Ecuador presenter that so far I have come to know that what type of initiatives you take usually on product innovation, because you have emphasized on the product innovation at your statement. Number two is who regulates the MFI sector in Ecuador at present? If there is no regulatory body, but there is at least a part, although they might not put their full concentration, but there is a specific section to oversee all of your operations of microfinance in Ecuador. And how do you define the market penetration in your country perspective? And last of all, that you have said that huge variation of interest cap. There is no interest cap specifically imposed by the government or anybody like this. So what is the lowest rate and what is the highest rate?
Okay. Go ahead,
Okay,
Alok.
so we have a bunch of questions there. First, a small clarification. What I did say was that there are basically two categories of institutions. You have the NBFC MFIs, which are regulated by the central bank, and you have the NGO MFIs, which are not regulated. So basically two categories. Yes, in the NBFC broader universe, of course, the NBFC MFI is a subset of that. Under the bylaws of the network, meaning my bylaws, we are saying that we will give membership only to, as a full formal membership, only to the regulated NBFC MFIs. So therefore, if an NGO MFI applies to us, we'll just say, thank you very much, but I'm sorry, my rules don't allow you to join me as a member. With regard to our interaction with the central bank, with the regulator, in point of fact, it's a very deep engagement model. Just to share with you, I happen to be based in Delhi in the north. The central bank is headquartered in Mumbai. I'm typically in Mumbai almost every 10 days. We have a very good relationship with the central bank officials at the highest levels. We are invited by the governor for the policy meetings. And I think I can say with complete honesty that the last 3 years, particularly post the crisis, on the one hand, the central bank reached out to the industry. The industry equally made every effort to try and, in a manner of speaking, and I repeat, in a manner of speaking, educate the central bank with regard to the industry issues. Because we can't forget the fundamental reality that the microfinance industry in India, in terms of the loan book, the assets, is barely about 1.5% of the total banking assets. So in the normal course, a central bank may not choose to give you too much time. But in reality, given the fact that the number of clients you're dealing with are very, very large, given the fact that the client base we're talking about in a democracy like ours is politically very important, and hence, yes, we got, I would say, a very high degree of regulatory time, attention, focus. It's a continuing game. And I think as a process, it has been laid down. And as a consequence, we work together fairly closely, fairly intensely. Now, that's by way of the two big pieces. Now, am I missing anything?
The microphone
Okay.
closer.
Yes. Yeah. What we do as a part of our member services is very definitely connecting with investors overseas. I mean, again, in a typical week, any typical week, I am speaking to investors. Not because I reach out, because they connect with me and say, please tell us what's happening, what is the industry doing, are things moving well, how do you see the central bank policy evolving towards the industry and so on. So same story, it's a manner, we are trying to ensure that the wider ecosystem is connected with the industry, and we reach out as best as we can with the entire set of players in that wider ecosystem.
Javier? And if others have questions, if you can raise your hand now so we can get the microphone to you and as soon as Javier is done.
And can you please speak into the microphone so everyone can hear you well?
Ok. Bueno, me voy a referir brevemente. Las instituciones de regulación en Ecuador para las microfinanzas no hay una sola, está dividido por tipo de institución. Hay una superintendencia de bancos para los bancos privados y hay una superintendencia de economía popular y solidaria que regula las cooperativas de ahorro y crédito y otras instituciones más pequeñas. Sin embargo, la clasificación obligatoria para todo el sector financiero en sus estados financieros y en la cartera, tiene que clasificar la cartera por tipo, pues por consumo, comercial, vivienda y microcrédito. Para clasificar como microcrédito, debe cumplir con algunos parámetros. El más importante es que la fuente de repago provenga de una microempresa. Entonces, solo ahí se clasifica y puede acceder al límite de tasa. Esto obviamente lo comprueba después la superintendencia con las auditorías que realiza. Entonces, la norma más bien es para la metodología de crédito, para la clasificación del crédito independientemente de la institución. Si una institución hace microcrédito, tiene que clasificarlo en su balance de esta manera y tiene que mandar un reporte de tasas de interés al Banco Central y ellos verifican que se cumpla con los techos de cada una de las tasas de interés, ¿no? Sí, y dentro de microcrédito puede haber varios productos y hay los 3 subsegmentos justamente que les decía, que al momento la característica del subsegmento es por monto. Entonces existe un techo de tasa de interés para créditos hasta $500, otro techo de interés para créditos hasta $2,000 y otro techo para créditos de $2,000 en adelante, que más o menos corresponde a las diferentes metodologías. Yo digo, banca comunal o crédito grupal son los créditos más pequeños, ahí viene lo que es crédito individual para los medianos y ya los otros que están en proceso, digamos, de convertirse en pequeña y mediana empresa.
Okay.
Yes,
Another question here?
I'm Sadiqul Haq from Bangladesh. My question is also to Mr. Alok Prasad, India. As I observed in your presentation that only one SRO has so far been established. So should we assume that the guidelines set forth for qualifying as SRO are so strict and difficult for NBFCs and FIs to fulfill or meet their criteria? Thank you.
You're absolutely right that the guidelines do provide for multiple SROs. So notionally, technically, it is possible to have more than one SRO. However, having said that, the fact is that being an SRO is not child's play. There is a huge amount of effort required to be able to play that role effectively. I mentioned earlier that it has been like a leap of faith on the part of the central bank. Now, if we fail there, if the SRO is not able to deliver, is not able to meet the expectations of the central bank, it's not just about the SRO getting de-recognized. That is the easy part. The hard, really hurtful aspect of it is the impact on the industry. In effect, then the central bank will be saying, you know, guys, you can't do it. You are incapable of being able to regulate yourself. Now, that, to my mind, will be the biggest damage that can be done to the industry. And as a consequence, I think this has to be treated with a huge amount of care. And it's not merely to do with the fact that the central bank has prescribed a whole bunch of boxes to be ticked. That's something which can be done, I guess, by some more networks, even though there's only one more credible network in India right now for MFIs. It's really being able to say that, yes, we can deliver credibly, and we will not create a situation which will lead to the credibility of the industry over time getting lost.
Thank you. I'd love to take more questions, but we're running out of time here. And to close, I'd like each of our panelists to say one thing you learned from the other countries that you're going to take home and try to apply in your own. All right? Yeah. So, Javier, can we start with you? Something you learned from either India or Bangladesh that you think you might be able to apply in Ecuador?
Bueno, un poco sobre la diversidad que existe, digamos, tanto en India y Bangladesh y el desarrollo que están logrando, sobre todo la interacción con los proyectos y programas estatales que tienen, ¿no? Porque si bien también existen programas estatales en Ecuador, pero un poco el sector privado está mucho más al margen, digamos. Entonces, dentro de la política pública yo veo que hay un mayor rol, que se reconoce efectivamente mucho más a las microfinanzas como parte integral del desarrollo para estos sectores. Es interesante también los procesos de supervisión. Sí, lo interesante de la autorregulación en la India me parece base fundamental, porque en Ecuador todavía no entienden bien el concepto de la autorregulación. Yo digo, incluso con una ley, una superintendencia,
You can bring Alok over to.
puede haber autorregulación, sí, o sea, no se opone, porque una cosa es que la autorregulación incluso puede tener un nivel más alto dentro de la red para diferentes niveles, ¿no? Obviamente también de Bangladesh, bueno, ahí como que la historia es más grande en el tema de desarrollo de productos complementarios, ya no solo es microcrédito, o sea, son los pioneros, entonces en ese sentido podemos también aprovechar mucho.
And Mari, Karim, what have you learned from Ecuador or India here today that you might want to take home to Bangladesh?
I think I must say that Bangladesh is a country of vibrant NGOs, and Grameen Bank, BRAC, ASHA, and the representatives of various big NGOs present here. In fact, even the PKSF model has been followed, replicated in some countries. Grameen Bank model all over the world, in most countries, BRAC model in some countries. But still, we think that there is still scope for improvement. And improvement is in the performance of our activities and good value for money, because whatever product we offer, I think there is scope for improving the effectiveness of products, and we will carry this from this summit.
Good. And Alok, what have you learned from Bangladesh or India here in this
sure. I
session?
think just very, very quickly, Bangladesh, of course, has been very much the founder of the microfinance movement, and I think more particularly given the regulatory specialized sort of institution building which has taken place, I think Bangladesh has the microfinance regulatory authority. We don't have that. And I think there is certainly some merit in looking at that model. Might even quickly share that when our Parliament Standing Committee examined the draft legislation on microfinance, they looked at that model also. And hence I think that there's something we need to figure out, whether the central bank or a specialized authority. That's, I think, the key lesson or the key aspect of Bangladesh. Ecuador, again, I think as you mentioned, it's a very diverse market despite being a small country, and having pricing at different loan sizes, different kinds of specialized products. I think an interesting model, because what we have today in India is like one flat proxy pricing cap because of the margin cap.
Right.
So this is an interesting model, and I think I certainly would look forward to figuring out how you do it. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, we've learned a lot from all of you. You've even learned from each other. So let's thank our panel for a great job here.